Hi everyone, it's Simone. I'm the founder of REID Bali, and I created it after relocating with my family to the beautiful island where we did schooling and having a great time and working in Bali. And it was through all those experiences that we wanted to help others just navigate the system and understand the best places to live and where to work and where to travel and where to go to school. There's some great information out there, but it can be completely confusing. We created this service to give informed decisions so you guys have the right tools, the right tips, the right information so you can make a really great choice and have a great Bali life. And this evening, I'm talking all about the Bali property market. So a lot of our clients move to Bali to have perhaps a long-term investment, also to find a new home and have a great home in Bali. And it might be a second home or finding a new home in Bali. So I'm really excited to have Tom Butler. He's the co-founder of REID. Now, REID is Bali's only independent property information provider to give you really strong insights into the Bali property market. They do provide monthly analytics and some great location reports. We're going to talk more about that. So I am going to get Tom to join us. It won't be one moment. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Simone. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm so excited. This is a conversation that has been long awaiting. We met quite a while ago, and I was a
Yes.
fan from the beginning because we Australians, for example, have some great providers or websites that we can go to get some data on what property markets look like. But Bali doesn't have that. So when I came across you guys, I was like, wow, this is super exciting. And we're here to talk about that tonight to give everyone a little bit more clarity, some really great insights, some tools, some resources and tips to make their Bali life journey, super easy, or not super easy. Obviously, nothing's easy in this world.
Just a little bit easier.
But we just want to give them some confidence and clarity. And you guys are always my first go-to be honest. I think you guys are doing a great job and you're only going to get better and better. So why don't we begin about explaining to everyone this evening what is REID and
Sure.
where did this all become from? And tell us a bit of background about yourself and everything in between.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. This is actually the first time I've actually done an Instagram live, so new experience for me, and
I
I'm
love it.
very, very happy to be here. Um, but yeah, you're right. Entering Bali, especially as a foreigner, can be quite the daunting challenge. It's a very fragmented market. If you are coming from more mature markets, entering Bali can seem like a whole new experience. It's not as regulated. There's not as much clarity. And that's really how sort of REID began. So myself and my co-founder, April, we sort of both come from real estate backgrounds. April a bit more on the commercial real estate side, myself from more real estate and development side. And we entered the Bali market several years ago. And, we kind of came into the market from different perspectives, but with the questions of like, hey, I understand this market and I have a good grasp on it, understanding real estate or coming from that world, but where can I verify any of this information? If you talk to an agent, if you spoke to a developer, they had a lot of their own resources, but it was very hard to actually get some sort of hard numbers on the market. And that sort of got us thinking like, well, hang on, surely a market like this does require these tools. And there are several providers of listing agents, so you very easily can find property,
Mm.
but then it's very hard to actually go, well, what context does this property sit in? This price that I'm looking at, can I relate that to a property down the road? Are people even buying here? Are people renting here? What is actually happening within the market? And that's where the REID journey sort of began. What we started to do in sort of late 2021, early 2022 was really start to cultivate resources and different sources of information to actually validate whether we could actually do this.
Mm.
Myself, I'm Australian. April is also Australian. So we come from very, I guess, mature property markets and we knew what we're looking for. But in Australia specifically, all of the sales and all of the leasing, it's all registered to the government. So there are very easy centralized databases that you can access. In Indonesia, that doesn't exist. Not all sales are registered. The ones that are registered, without trying to get into the nuance of it all very quickly, the ones that are registered, are sometimes not even reported correctly. So the sort of challenge that we faced was, rather than going to a source like the government, we had to kind of
Mm,
go from the grassroots of, well, we have to go directly to the agents and developers and try and source them, and
mm.
then B, give them a reason to actually want to share the data with us so that we could create a centralized sort of platform that then we could redistribute to the market. And it did take us a sort of 18 months, 24
Mm.
months to come up with this process and come up with the right partners and come up with, that sort of foundation of the database.
What numbers? Sorry to interrupt. What sort of numbers are we talking? Like numbers of developers in Bali, number of agents in Bali? Are we
Yeah,
talking hundreds?
yeah. On the agency side, absolutely in the hundreds. There are definitely the key agencies that have a very strong sort of team based in Bali, but then there's a lot of independent brokers and agents. And then on the developer side, that can be a question of how long is a piece of string, because everyone, you and I are both in Bali frequently. Most people you speak to will classify themselves as a developer of some sort,
Yes.
or whether that meets the criteria of a kind of
Mm,
developer you would expect in mature markets is another question.
mm.
But in terms of how many sort of large scale developers, we're looking at sort of under 50. If
Okay.
you're looking at more boutique sort of smaller developers, or
Mm,
people maybe building their home plus maybe some adjacent
mm.
plots, you're sort of edging up towards, just over 100 there as well. But it's a very sort of fragmented market. So what we have done is actually, over the last few years, cultivated all of these sources, brought them together, and then we act as very similar as to what you would see, in Australia, as just a resource for the information. So we can either look at a broad market spectrum of how is the market performing overall? Is it on its way up? Is it, on its way down? All the way down to more of a location based sort of granularity, where we can look at, okay, what areas are emerging, what areas, how are they transacting currently, all sorts of different metrics. So yeah, there's a variety of different kind of services we can provide, but really at the end of the day, our role and what I guess our core tenant is providing sort of access to that information within the market.
Great. No, that's super exciting. So you're for the average person who's looking to buy a home, right through to professional, commercial businesses that would obviously like a huge amount of insight and data to be able to run their business even more successful in the real estate market. So a huge
Absolutely.
range that you're helping people with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those sources that you were saying, they're coming from the grassroots. And how
Yeah.
has that been in that process? And is everyone on board? And what apart from the people on the grassroots level, where else are we getting that data from?
Yeah. Look, actually, surprisingly, when we first started, we kind of thought, look, this may not work. There's probably a reason why it doesn't exist. We discovered the reason is because it's so difficult and takes so much hard work. But the response has actually been fantastic. We're partnered with most of the major agents and most of the major developers within Bali now, and their response was, we've been waiting for something like this. We want these tools, we want this information, so that we can say, look, what we say about Bali, which essentially is the same thing. It's a really strong, growing market.
Mm.
You don't have to take our word for it. There's an independent source of information that can demonstrate that sort of performance. So we got a really positive response. And I've got to say, month on month, we emboldened by what we're doing, just by, the more people we're reaching, the more companies who are engaging with us. We have had a couple of kind of negative engagements, but really very few and far between. So it's been very responsive, and we're very happy to see that. In terms of like alternative data sources, we do collaborate with the government in terms of land information,
Mm.
and the BPN, sort of actually getting more what you would say on the freehold side, or a little bit more of the local information.
Mm.
We also work with the Bureau of Statistics so that we can look at
Mm.
tourist information for that adjacent data set. And then we're also looking at rental data, and we get that by purchasing or licensing that from a series of online travel agencies, sort of your
Mm.
booking.com,
Mm.
yeah, your hotels.com, so that we can also not just look at the transaction side of the property market, but at the operational side as well. So
Mm.
we really have a broad spectrum of data.
That's amazing. So you did mention freehold just then, and I think just for bringing it back to the basics,
Yes.
if we could just have a quick overview, because in your data you do present both leasehold and
Mhm.
freehold, and they're the two
Yes,
options that someone can invest in Bali. So can you maybe
absolutely.
just give us a little bit of a background on that and a little bit of an easy definition on those two?
Sure. So I think the easiest way to describe it, freehold is what you would equate to your traditional ownership in most sort of Western markets. It's something you own in perpetuity.
Mm.
Um, and that's essentially the easiest breakdown there. Leasehold is very much as the name sort of suggests, it is a lease of the land. It is just a long-term lease. So generally they will sit somewhere in the sort of 20 to 30-year range. The market sits at about 26 years on average. So that's the different ownership models. Leasehold, even when you're looking at 26 years, that's still a pretty long time. So, there are some pros and cons on either side. And obviously, we can get into that if you'd like to, but they're the main differences between the two ownership types.
Mm.
One big clarification, I should say, is for freehold. People often say that foreigners can't own freehold.
Mm.
That's incorrect. They can own freehold. There's two caveats to that. The first is it needs to be owned through a company. So it needs to be owned through what's called a PMA.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a technical adjustment in the naming of the land title. So
Mm.
it will go from freehold to what's called HGB. So it's a very small technical thing. The rights and the eligibility of the land does not change. Nothing like that. It's just a notification that this is owned by a foreign entity as opposed
Mm.
to a Indonesian citizen.
Hmm. And you would say obviously the entry to market is a lot easier with leasehold, a lot
Yes.
cheaper and a lot easier and more straightforward. So that, I mean, obviously you're reporting on both,
Yeah.
but leasehold would be probably be a more outstanding and more of the market. But we can talk about this as just what you're actually reporting on. So from the
Yeah.
latest data that you obviously see month on month, so property prices, the demand, obviously the inventory, buyer and seller market. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on the trends and things that you're seeing now that you've done this for a little while now? I'd love to hear.
Sure. Well, it's been quite interesting. I think on the last few years, the Bali market has really gone through quite an explosion. I think on the back of, COVID and coming out of those couple of years there, a lot of people globally were looking for new lifestyles, new opportunities, maybe rethinking about how they structured their life. And Bali really, given that it's such a desirable location, I think really saw such a huge influx of people both looking to purchase, but
Mm-hmm.
also looking to, build their own homes or build sort of boutique developments themselves. So one thing we've really seen over the last few years is a huge influx of supply. The market's kind of grown about 30 to 40% year on year, which is really quite large.
Mm-hmm.
That does need to be put within the context of where the Bali market is at. It is very much in its infancy when we talk about property development and property investment. It is a very young market that really has only been, I guess, around since sort of the mid 2010s.
Mm.
But in terms of what that influx of new projects and new properties has seen, definitely a really big spike in the smaller asset classes. So your 1 and 2 bedroom properties. Traditionally, the Bali market was, a 3 bedroom villa sitting on, 500 square meters, some nice open grounds.
Mm.
The market now is definitely had a bit of a skew towards the 1 and 2 bedroom, sort of
Mm.
smaller, more compact assets.
Mm-hmm.
That's really driven from the investment side, people who have seen this growth of sort of Airbnb rentals. Obviously, Bali is a tourism market. Um, so that's been quite a driving factor or sort of the growth center of the market. But what we've also seen is really steady price increase as well. And we look just at leasehold pricing, the last few years, it's grown a steady sort of 5% or 3 to 5% year on year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not this kind of boom or bust town that you may hear about. It's actually quite sort of steady growth. And then when we look at, what is driving that or who is picking up all of this supply, as I mentioned, it's a tourism market. And one thing that Bali has demonstrated quite strongly in the last few years is how robust of a market it is. Tourism last year, was up 20% in terms of foreign arrivals. There was over 10 million people in terms of domestic arrivals
Mm.
to actually be its sort of strongest year on record.
Mm.
And that's reflected in the rental market. Total revenue is up by 25%. So, that sort of growth and exposure of the property market is really underpinned by the resilience of the tourism and the rental rental market.
Very interesting. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. So now, obviously, you're covering the island, but what would you say would be the three top performing areas or locations? Because you provide so many great location reports and insights. But what are the top three performing, would you say?
Yeah, well, I think that's performing is an interesting word because it kind of comes down to, what are you looking at?
That's it.
Um, as I mentioned, there has been a really large drive I would say from the investment sector, but I think we've also seen quite a large increase of, people seeking a sea change, people looking for, that second home or that holiday home. Um, and your traditional tourism markets of sort of Seminyak,
Mm,
Ubud,
mm,
they have remained quite strong. But
mm-hmm,
what we're starting to see is sort of these emerging pockets that have some distinct characteristics. Um, so depending how familiar your audience is with the actual Bali Island, if we're looking at the sort of south of Bali and the Bukit Peninsula, that sort of, that peninsula down the bottom, that has seen a huge influx of, one bedroom apartments, two-bedroom villas. And
mm,
that's really focused on much more of a younger, lifestyle driven sort of demographic.
mm,
And that's really, in terms of new supply, is a huge growth area in Bali right now. So that comprises of neighborhoods like Uluwatu, Bingen, Ungasan. I'm sure if anyone is kind of at least keeping a general look on Bali, they would have heard those locations repeatedly. And that definitely has had a huge sort of growth over the last
mm,
couple of years. But then you get some interesting areas such as Pereiranan.
mm,
That's the sort of fringe neighborhood adjacent to Canggu, which again
mm-hmm,
is one of the more, has really been the growth center of Bali for the last 10 years. Pereiranan is just sort of on the fringe of that. And that's really grown in the last couple of years to define itself as more of a premium market. It's really come out focused on a broad set of assets from, 1 to 3 6 bedroom, leasehold and freehold.
mm,
But it's definitely focused a lot more on premium assets. If you look at the sort of F&B and lifestyle amenities that have gone into
mm,
that area, it is of an elevated sort of level, a bit more selective sort of level. So that's been quite interesting. And then, I would probably highlight one other area which is quite interesting. And again, your audience might have heard of this. It's a little neighborhood called Yani. That's probably about a sort of 15-20 minute ride or drive from Canggu. There's a large development there called Nuanu,
mm-hmm,
which is this sort of huge project, 40-hectare project that's undergoing at the moment. It's really this lifestyle sort of driven development. But what we've seen in that neighborhood specifically is a real focus on family living.
mm,
There's a new school in there, a couple of schools proposed around the area. The assets that are sort of coming to market are a lot larger. And that's sort of steering away from more of the rental driven market and looking to provide for families.
mm,
Um, it is a little bit further away. It's not sort of like in the center of these tourist areas, but it is close enough where you can still access all of the amenities that you have there. So that also has sort of, I guess, emerged in the last sort of 12, 18 months.
mm,
And I would say they're sort of like the three sort of key areas. The traditional areas are still performing really well. You have your Sanur, your Ubud, your Seminyak. They still perform very strongly. If you are looking for their investment side, you definitely still can investigate that.
mm.
If you are looking for a bit more of a lifestyle or to move, there are some fringe sort of areas that are definitely worth investigating.
Mm. And so you did mention Sanur, which obviously it's a hot place for a lot of my clients that love to go there, both from a family point of view and a retirement point of view. I
Yeah.
know you recently spoke about that. So perhaps from a location spotlight point of view,
Hmm.
could you share a little bit more? Because there's a lot of sort of great things happening with the Sanur Harbour being updated. There's an
Yeah.
international hospital, new
Yeah.
international schools. You know it as well. So
Yeah.
maybe if you could share a little bit more about the Sanur market and what it's looking like, because it's changing quite rapidly.
Yeah, Sanur is one of those markets that probably doesn't get the spotlight that it deserves. It's sort of drowned out by all of these kind of new flashy suburbs like your sort of Bingans and Pereiranans. But Sanur is kind of this, yeah, it's a bit of it's a, I wouldn't call it a sleepy town because it
Mm,
actually has, if you go there, you mentioned it's got the International Hospital, it's got Bali's largest shopping mall that's just
yeah.
recently opened. It's got the new marina that's coming in a couple of years. It has incredible infrastructure like roads that are actually properly built, sidewalks that are, suitable for two people to walk down. It actually is really well developed. It just hasn't really received the coverage of a lot of other markets. And I guess as a reflection of that, that market is actually very steady. It hasn't
Mm,
seen a huge influx of new supply. It's actually kept its supply levels quite steady. Pricing has also sort of hovered about the 3% growth rate. So it hasn't kind of skyrocketed, but it hasn't also dropped off at all. I think what's really interesting is when you look at the demand for that area as well, hotels and rentals in that area perform amongst some of the strongest across the
mm,
island in total. So it is a very healthy market. It does skew more towards the sort of 3, 4 bedroom category.
mm-hmm.
The demographic is a little bit older there, but I would say anecdotally, the amount of requests or the amount of I guess, inquiries we get about Sanur, I would say that potentially that might be changing in the next couple
Mm,
of years because I do think that people are starting to realize, well, hang on, this market has been well established for many years. It has a lot of great international amenities.
mm,
It's on the eastern coastline of Bali, which a lot of
mm.
people don't realize that actually it's a different sort of beach kind of
Yes.
infrastructure you get. So it's white sand beaches as opposed to the black sand of the south.
True.
Um, and so it does have a different feel to it. It does have a bit of a different vibe down there. So yeah, it's a very strong, very robust market.
Great, thank you for sharing. And also, just saw a question pop up. Is Seseh too far from Perenninan? Was the question. And what are you
Yeah.
saying?
Seseh is actually just the next suburb over, so
Yeah.
very adjacent to Pereiranan. Sesek also has a large scale project going in, the Anantara sort of residential hotel development. I would say the local expat community may not be too happy with that. However, the local Balinese community is very happy with that development going in. That's it's a much smaller location than Pereiranan. I think the development there probably won't reach the scale of Pereiranan just because of the sort of tipping point of supply at the moment. So it does have this sort of positioning as a bit of a premier enclave just off Pereiranan. It has a really beautiful beach. It has a great sort of very small select group of amenities, restaurants and shops. Um, because of that, I think slowdown of development and also some of the zoning around there, you
Mm,
won't get as much supply coming in. So Seseh is a great sort of little town.
mm,
Its price point is slightly below Pereiranan, um, but it may see a little bit of a spike in the sort of the overflow from that area in maybe the coming years. But there is a sort of a large scale project there that probably will have an impact in the next 3 to 4 years as it comes to market
mm.
as well.
Thank you. Okay, that's a good insight.
Mm.
And so the actual insights that you report on, so clearance rates, as you said, so a little bit of return on investment, build size, all, leasehold and freehold, all that sort of stuff. So how can these numbers help us and how will we use your data to make these informed decisions, whether it's just
Yeah.
a regular mum and dad or someone else that's looking to get that second home?
Yeah, well, look, I think the most important thing is a lot of people sometimes, they think that data is there to give them the answer. What we always say is data is there to give you the context. It's there to give you sort of identify your risks and opportunities. I think especially when you are coming from a foreign market or coming from a foreign location into Bali, what we provide is the context and the confidence to make the decision that you're looking for. So we can look at a variety of metrics, whether that just be, price or property size, down to more value-driven metrics around sort of price per square meter, amenities, looking at sort of a yield analysis or anything like this. But it's not, it's there more so to give you the confidence that the market you're going into and possibly the property you're looking at or the area you're looking at, you have that information around there and the confidence to make an informed decision, not just sort of going into a market, blind and necessarily having to sort of rely on one or two pieces of advice. Ideally, sort of our role is we provide the information to the agents and the developers so that they can, provide that directly to their clients. However, we also do provide it, as you said, to individuals as well who come to us. And it really is there as almost like a bit of a safety net. If you are going to make a decision around property, it's probably going to be one of the larger financial decisions you'll make. So, our reports, the ones online, they start from about 79 US dollars. For, a very small amount of money, you can just get a little bit of comfort in knowing what is happening in the area that you're looking at, so that, you're not necessarily going to turn around one day and be like, oh, wow, maybe I paid way too much for the villa I was looking for.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a valuable resource. As I said, I've been number one fan for a very long time. So I did see a question pop up. Is Brouwer still a good place to invest? It's been around for a very long time. Everyone knows about it. I just saw a question there just sort of saying, what's your thoughts on Brouwer in that market?
Yeah, look, again, I probably should put like a little asterisk here. This is not financial advice.
No, that's right.
But look, Barawa, Canggu, Seminyak, all of these really well-established areas that are still great options. I'm in Bali constantly. I spend most of my time there, and something that when you're in the market, I think it's a lot of the time you can possibly feel that, or people feel like, oh, Barawa is the old location. We have to go to a new location, but really, it's not. I think there is, and again, that kind of comes down to what the maturity of the Bali market is. As I mentioned earlier, it's very much in its infancy. So areas like Barawa, like Canggu, like Seminyak actually have still a lot of growth until they are, people talk about overdevelopment a little bit in Bali. I can tell you now that there's a lot of talk about development, but in terms of actual, tangible buildings that are being completed and coming to market, we haven't reached that level yet. And there's a lot more mature sort of developers coming into the market because of the nature of leasehold, where you do have this sort of 20 to 30-year period. You almost inherently will get this refresh of property over time because leases will come to an end where someone either will extend their lease or come in and take over that lease, and that property has to be renewed or possibly a new asset created. In the older markets, sort of like the Kuta area, we're even sort of talking to some clients now who are looking to take large sections of property and completely reimagine those. So when we talk about areas like Barawa, depending on what your objectives are, yes, it's definitely still a very, it's a great market. It probably doesn't have the premium price tag of a Canggu attached to it because of the name brand, but it's right there, co-located. Really great location as well. Shares all of the essentially the same amenities and infrastructure as Canggu. So
yeah. No, thank you for that. And so you did talk about development and overdevelopment. So maybe we talk about the sustainable side of things. And, that's a global thing. We're always looking at sustainable living and how, things, and that's a big thing that Bali's always trying to focus on. I can see that, which is really exciting. A lot of developers are going down that path. What's your thoughts on all of that, especially, for the Bali property market and the sustainable side?
Bali has always had very clear guidelines around what to build where and sort of how. Whether they've been enforced or not has been a different story. So when we talk about sort of the sustainable growth of development, I think the Bali sort of government and the Indonesian government has a lot more of a focus on that now, and there's already reports of properties that have been built in the wrong zones or not having the right permitting, being closed, or construction being shut down. So from a sustainable growth perspective, that is definitely becoming more prevalent within the market. In terms of sustainable building practices, look, there's a couple of things that go into that. One is the access to the knowledge behind that, and two is the access to materials behind that. You definitely see a lot more developers talking about eco-friendly materials, eco-friendly design, things like that, where there is much more of an emphasis on that. Bali is an island paradise, so I do think there is a very natural kind of synergy between, environmental design in sort of this paradise location. So it may not be one of the leading components of the market right now, but it is increasing. And I think as the market matures, as we go through development cycles, we will see that play more of a role.
That's great. And so, what's one piece of advice that you would? I mean, you've given us lots already, but what's one piece of advice that you could help, help people make those informed decisions to give them a bit more confidence, a bit more clarity? Obviously, signing up to the location reports, or being part of the free reports, or joining even the database analytics that you offer as well. So, from all your beautiful experience and all these things that you're experiencing along the way, what's the one piece of advice that you can share with us this evening?
Well, obviously, yes, go to realinfo.id to get all of the insights available.
Of course.
But I would say, for a lot of people that we engage with and a lot of our clients who are talking to people looking to buy property in Bali, there's always a reason why people want to buy property in Bali. And that is really because of the amazing place that Bali is. And that sort of underlying sort of beauty of Bali sometimes gets lost in the chaos and the havoc of, it's kind of bit of a wavy market that doesn't necessarily work the way you would expect it to work. So my advice would be always remember why you want to buy or sort of move to Bali. Hold on to that, but then be curious as well. Don't sort of get swept up in the romanticism of it. Ask the same questions you would ask and expect the same sort of answers you would get if you were to buy property, in your native market as well, because the answers are out there. There are, amazing advisors, services like yourself where you help people relocate. These services exist. It's just a matter of sort of being curious and coupling that, desirability of an amazing location with that curiosity. And there are some amazing outcomes to be had in the Bali market. So, yeah, that would be my advice.
It's beautiful. That's really, that concludes, I think, this talk. I think that's been fantastic. If there's anything else you want to share, but I know that people can watch this again, they can send questions. My go-to is always the location reports to start with, just to dip your toes in the water, whether you're just curious about the market, whether you're moving in a year's time, you've just arrived, whatever it might be. And we've got that beautiful exclusive 20% discount, which is so lovely. I appreciate that.
Correct.
And yeah, people are really enjoying that. So yeah, if there's anything else that you want to share, what the future looks like, what's in store for you guys, and what's going to continue to be seen for us on the market, and what we can look forward to.
Yeah, I think, over the next sort of 12 months, I think Bali will go through a bit of a settling period. As I said, the last couple of years has been, I think globally, the last couple of years has been, a bit of a bounce back. But Bali, I think, is just at the start of its journey of where it's going to kind of get to. As I mentioned, there's a lot of really sort of sophisticated operators coming into the market. The market in Bali is really concentrated in one area. The new government, they've already mentioned or really committed to a second airport. There's a lot of really great projects happening within Bali. So I think the future is really bright there. I think Indonesia as a whole is really well positioned at the moment, obviously not without its own challenges, but I think this corner of the world has got a bright future ahead. And yeah, hopefully we get to go along for the ride.
That's right. And keep sharing the news with us. So thank you
Absolutely.
for what you do. You're doing a great service for us foreigners trying to navigate the Bali market, which is a big challenge, I think. And as you said, to be a bit more, serious about the big move and the price points and what you're going to invest in, to not get swept up is a really good point as well.
Yeah.
But that's, it's all good, promising news, and it's been some really, so I really, really appreciate your time with us this evening. I hope people learn more about it and can send us obviously questions after this as well. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom, for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And we'll be posting this again. And please jump onto the websites for more information. Thanks, Tom. See you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you.